Buenos días. No hablo español suficientemente por aquí. Entonces, hablo inglés. Pardon. Good morning. I apologize, I don't speak Spanish well enough to do it here, so I will be speaking English, and there are translations as we go through. I am Tom Dallessio. I'm the president, CEO, and publisher of Next City. We are a nonprofit organization whose mission is to inspire social, economic, and environmental change in cities through journalism and events. We publish daily and weekly news posts on nextcity.org. We encourage you all to follow us there. And we run a program for urban leaders under 40 called Vanguard. If there are any urban leaders here under 40, I encourage you to look at our website, nextcity.org, and check us out. I have the privilege today to chair this plenary session on a very seminal topic. We had the opportunity just to hear from Dr. Close about the importance of the new urban agenda. And I'm thrilled that this plenary will talk about how governance must change to enable the smart city. There is a question mark at the end of this caption, but I think we all need to put an exclamation point at the end. And I'd like to briefly introduce our speakers. I will then ask each of them 3 questions or so. They will spend 3 to 4 minutes discussing any or all of those questions, and then I have a specific question for each of our speakers. We will then have some concluding remarks. To my immediate left is Dr. Vivian Balakrishnan. Dr. Balakrishnan is the Minister in charge of Smart Nation Initiative of the Government of Singapore. Next is Ms. Aisha Bin Bishr. She is the Assistant Director General of the Executive Office, Smart Dubai Taskforce leader. We also have Mr. Matthew Pencharz, who's the Deputy Mayor for Environment and Energy at the Greater London Authority. And last but not least, we have Mr. Amr Salam. Amr is the Global Managing Director for Smart Cities at Cisco Systems. This plenary will talk about the key issues related to smart cities and governance, and I asked each of our speakers to think about 3 key questions. Number 1, cities around the world are embracing the title smart, but are they? Number 2, what's the current status of governance in the best and the worst of smart cities? And number 3, what impediments must be overcome to address current and future challenges? And so at this point, I'd like to start with Vivian and ask Vivian to tackle any or all of those questions, please.
Well, that's a very wide set of questions. But since I'm from the government, maybe I'll deal with the governance issue. I think the first thing I would say, coming from Singapore, which is a tiny city-state, 700 square kilometers with 5.5 million people packed into it, is that people's main concern is not technology, but really jobs. So the first duty of any government, given the digital revolution which is going on now, is what are the jobs of the future? Are our people going to be ready for those jobs? Even the arguments, the political arguments about inequality. Inequality, in my hypothesis, is not the result of a right-wing conspiracy, us versus them, Occupy, etc. It's really also a reflection of a technological revolution which is decimating jobs, which is decreasing the value of good middle-class, white-collar jobs, and things that used to take half a century or a century to occur. These changes are now occurring at a rate of decades, and most people are going to need more than one job in their lifetimes. So jobs, number 1. Number 2 is they're interested in the quality of life, meaning it's all well and fine to have Wi-Fi everywhere, to have sensors everywhere, but is it going to make a difference to my life? Is my daily commute going to be shorter, more pleasant? Are my interactions with government going to be customized, going to be relevant? Are my needs going to be met? So that's the second, the quality of life. The third part is somewhat topical now. The digital revolution has not created one happy global village where we all understand each other, we all watch the same shows, and we all subscribe to the same political ideologies. In fact, one problem with the internet and the World Wide Web, as it is now, is that no matter how crazy you are, you can find someone crazier to affirm your radical views. And at the extreme, extremism, terrorism, tribalism, and the fact that everybody feels like a minority now. Because, for most of human existence, we've lived, worked, played with people who looked like us, smelled like us, ate our food, prayed to the same God. Now, everyone is acutely aware that you're a minority, that there are people who are different from you. And in this search for identity, search for defining values, tribalism is accentuated and taken to its extreme, ends up with violence and terrorism. So the point is to assume that the internet is a recipe for world peace and a global village is wishful thinking. So perhaps I'll stop at this point, but leave these three thoughts in your mind, right? That in the end, it's not about technology, it's about impact on people. People's jobs, people's opportunities, and the inequalities which generate during such breathtaking technological revolution. And then the fact that we need to understand that people just want a better quality of life, better services, not technology. And third, think about the potential for extremism, radicalism, and ultimately violence, which is accentuated or facilitated through our so-called smart systems. So I'll leave it there as food for thought.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for those very provocative comments. Aisha.
When we say a smart city, is it something new? Always cities being smart, and this is what differentiates cities from towns and villages. What really people want from cities is to have an efficient services, seamless services, and cities should provide an enriched experience for their citizens. So, is smart city is a hype? Is it a marketing trendy topic? I'm not sure, because always cities being smart. But I think today for city managers to sit and see exactly how they can enrich the experience of their citizens, residents, visitors. This is the most important thing. And to provide a safe environment, a seamless environment. And always the cities will be smart. So it's not something new for us. But I think the journey for each city differ, really the challenges they have in each city. For instance, in Dubai, our goal is to make our city the happiest city. Taking the technology as a mean for us. It's not the end goal for us. Technologies do provide only solution, and only solution can bring happiness for the people. So smart is not something new. Smart always will be there, utilizing whatever technology is available, whenever the technology will be available for city managers, for people to use. But again, cities are smart.
Yeah. Thank you. Matthew.
Well, we heard earlier in the opening plenary the astonishing urbanization that we're seeing. It's one of the sort of great mega trends we're seeing in the next few decades. And London, which is obviously an old, developed city, is not alone in that. We are growing the fastest in our history at over 100,000 people a year. Now, that may pale in insignificance some developing countries, China and India, but when it comes to Europe and the West, that is astonishingly quick. We've overtaken our greatest ever population, which was in 1939, then we saw a precipitous drop, and it's now overtaken that. And we're projected to increase from our current 8.6 million to 11 million or probably somewhere north of that by mid-century. And that's all in an era of much stricter planning controls than we had perhaps 50, 60, 70 years ago when we built a lot of the tube lines out to what were then fields and are now what we call Metroland, the suburbs. And that clearly puts a lot of pressure on the current hard infrastructure that we have. And we've done some detailed work thinking about what we need up to 2050 to house that population, to move them around, to keep the water flowing, to take away the wastewater, to make sure the lights stay on, all within sort of carbon targets as well. And I see there's a sort of burning platform here effectively in that cities need to see, which are growing as quickly as certainly as London, and also have quite an old, hard infrastructure, to get more efficiencies out of that, to have utilization rates much higher, to use things in a more effective way. If we can reduce the peaks at the peak power times, which in the UK are in the morning and early evenings in the winter. Obviously, in other countries, it might be the other way around in the summer. If we can lop off the peak loads, think how many fewer wind farms or nuclear power stations you need to build. Equally, the pressures on the health system. How can we have smart systems to make that more efficient, to treat people in their home rather than healthcare centres, and things like that. And I think that is where I think cities are having to move into smart area, having to set out the problems, and give to the market the data to come up with the solutions to solve those problems. And certainly that's what London has been doing, is liberating our data as much as we can. So we have pretty static public sector data, but also some dynamic public transport data, which has driven forward the developer community to come forward with apps. The City Mapper is obviously the most famous one, but just £1 million of our transit authority's investment in liberating that data has produced hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these apps, which just shows you what you can do by liberating your data. But there is a real driver around this, certainly in London, and I'm sure among many other cities, is that with this growing population and with difficulties in building the infrastructure at the speed, perhaps historically, that you'd need to do to keep up with that population growth, how can you make the current infrastructure more efficient, and help to deliver effectively more for less?
Thank you, Matthew. And Amr.
Thanks. When you listen to all the previous panelists, everybody mentioned, Dr. Aisha talked about happy people, Dr. Vivian talked about the people, Matthew spoke about the population. Having a smart city is wrongly perceived as a technology play, while mostly it's all about the people. How do you make the economy? How do you make the social environment? How do you make the environment overall in the city more sustainable to benefit the people that live in the city? If you look at the benefits that people would get from a social environment, from a social perspective, people want the city to be better to live in. They want to be happier. They want to find jobs. They want to be able to enjoy their life in a safe environment. If you look at the economic benefits, the city has to be more affordable to live in, has to attract foreign direct investments, has to attract people to live in the city. The city has to also have an infrastructure that costs less to operate per capita. And from an environmental perspective, the city has to have good quality water, good quality air, has to have a lower carbon footprint. All this is what we call a sustainable environment, and a socially sustainable environment, and economically sustainable environment. In order to achieve this, there are many ways we've worked with governments across the world, and you see that visionary leadership is usually the #1 thing that needs to drive the agenda. In all of the cities that we've spoken about here in the panel, there is a visionary leader that drives the agenda forward. There is a visionary leader that puts the ambition forward. I don't mean that in the other cities or in most of the cities in the world. I've never met with a mayor in a city that told me, I want to be having a stupid city. Everybody wants a smart city. Everybody wants a smart environment to live in. But you have to have the drive to push the agenda forward. You have to have the drive to to break down the barriers and the inhibitors in the environment in order for us to drive the smart city agenda. Creating an ecosystem for the city, from the private and public sector and from all global companies, to contribute to the smart city agenda with the academia, with the people, but also involve the people. So it becomes a private, public, people participation in the agenda. The people are the ones that will make the city smart. They will have to live it. The city will not be smart and finish. It's a journey that they have to go through. It's a lifestyle that everybody has to adopt. Every business has to adopt, every government agency has to adopt, and every citizen has to adopt as we move forward. And then obviously, one of the most important factors is having standards across the different agencies in order for the infrastructure to be manageable. If you look at many of the smart cities around the world, every one of them has created something to break down the siloed barriers. If you look at a city like Dubai, there is a council that connects different agencies with a common agenda. If you look at Barcelona, they've created an environment where there is a budget that cuts across all the agencies in order for it to fund the cross-agency initiatives. So on in Hamburg, so on in Copenhagen, so on in Adelaide, in Kansas City, all of the different examples of smart cities. What they need to do is to make sure that the old thinking of every department and every agency driving an agenda that goes deep into one domain without regarding the neighboring domains, that infrastructure is not properly used. In order to manage the infrastructure better and manage the investment better, you need common data. You need a common infrastructure to host everything on top of that. So these are the best practices that we learn from cities that are currently leading in this space.
Thank you, Amr. And for those that are tweeting, there were 4 key points that were raised through all this. Again, Vivian identified for us, in particular for the internet, the potential for extremism. Aisha talked a bit about Dubai being the happiest city. We also had a discussion from Matthew, in particular in London, and I thought his term liberating data was absolutely seminal, and we look forward to hearing more about that. And Amr just in particular talked about the private, public, people agenda. So those are 4 immediate takeaways from this. I now have a specific question, excuse me, for each of our panelists. And Aisha, if you don't mind, I'll start with you. Would you please tell us a bit more about the Smart Dubai Taskforce team and what lessons you've learned regarding ICT projects?
Well, ICT projects based on the people who are running these projects. So if they are not sharing the same vision and they don't have the same agenda, no matter what type of ICT technologies at the back end, it will never be success. The first thing you need to do is to do a proper change management course with your team to make sure that they all have the same vision, they all see the same page with you. Otherwise, it'll become a very difficult task and it will take years and years. So this is one of the main things that we learned in Dubai, to bring everyone on board with us, whether it be government or private sector, to see the same vision. It was a difficult task. It took us almost 1.5 years, but alhamdulillah, today if you ask any one of the members in the executive committee, they all see the same destination that we see it at the heart of Smart City team. So change management is one of the main things that any leader or any project manager for an ICT project should have and implement.
I couldn't agree with you more. Critical role of leadership in this effort. Thank you, Aisha. Amr, what is Cisco doing to advance smart transportation, energy, and other infrastructure?
At Cisco, we've been in this journey for quite a long time. We've started what we call intelligent urbanization, and then smart and connected communities and smart cities probably 6-7 years ago. There are multiple domains that impact the life of the citizens in every city. Transportation, energy, obviously are two key domains in this area. When you look at traditionally, transportation was looked at as one agency that is responsible for the movement and the mobility across the city. But today, all other agencies have impact on transportation because technology made all the data connected and interchangeable. If you look at transportation today, you cannot disconnect transportation from the municipality work, from the waste management work, from the water management work, from all of these different pieces. Leverage the same infrastructure to to deliver their services more efficiently. So energy is the same thing. Transportation has impact on energy. Lighting, street lighting has impact on energy. Even the private sector has impact. So I go back to the point I made earlier, is that one common infrastructure that hosts all different services will provide one common set of data that would be available consistently to all different use cases or applications or domains. In transportation specifically, today mobility has become, in every single discussion that you have with mayors, the impact of transportation on the city, be it the carbon footprint, be it the loss of productive work because of traffic delays, but even more importantly, it impacts the social behavior of the people living in the city. People have road rage, people increase the traffic offenses in the city, and that impacts the whole image, impacts the tourism, impacts... So again, transportation is no longer dealt with as one domain, but actually impacts everything else in the city that has, that suffers from the results of bad transportation systems.
Thank you. And as we look in particular at the critical issues of infrastructure, we see a variety around the world of services. The idea, though, of connecting the data and making sure in particular that those who manage these systems understand the interrelationships and the connectivity is key. Oftentimes we find ourselves in silos and managers end up deciding they were just going to manage one specific aspect of that. So those are points well taken. Thank you very much. Matthew, would you tell us a bit about what are smart cities like London and where are they headed in regards to energy and the environment? In particular, how is technology transforming how the public sector provides critical services?
Well, on the public sector ones, I suppose some of the examples of how we're using data from different areas to de-siloize, I think I just invented a verb there, some of these city-managed areas. So air pollution and transport is it's a relatively low-hanging fruit, in fact. So we have air quality sensors across the city, and we are increasingly having hybrid public transport vehicles, buses, and in due course taxis. All new taxis from 2018 will have to be zero-emission capable. And you can see immediately how if you tie up the drivetrain of our buses and our taxis with air pollution sensors, you can have them, when they're doing the run to the motorway, they can put on their petrol hybrid engine, their petrol internal combustion engine. But when they're in the areas of high air pollution, perhaps in the central area or areas where there's high population exposure to that, they'll go onto their electric drive cycles and have a real impact on health outcomes. But also what we're, I think, coming off what Amra said just now, through our utilities, we're using our position as city government. Now, we don't have a direct lever to instruct our utilities, which are all privatized, regulated monopoly utilities in the UK, to liberate their data, I'll use that term again, but we're working very closely with them to try and get the data out there in a way that it may not all be public, because some of it is obviously commercially sensitive or even have security concerns, which is understandable, but in a way that the important players can see a unified map about what their planned interventions are. So the water companies perhaps didn't talk as well as they might have done with the telephone company, who didn't talk perhaps might as well as they've done with the gas company, electricity company. So the notorious example, certainly in the UK, is the same piece of road being dug up umpteen times in 6 months as they put in all their different cables, pipes, wires, etc. Sure. So what we are seeking to do, and there's a real opportunity here, through smarter use of data, ensuring the data is interoperable, is so that these companies can sort of see what each other is planning to do and plan their interventions in a more coherent way to reduce disruption to residents, but also, in fact, there's a huge operational savings, and they're beginning to see that. And we really are seeing progress in this area where we have tried several times before, but now we're really seeing that, and it shows you, I think, the opportunities of city government influencing, not dictating, because we don't have that power, but influencing the big providers to do that.
So it sounds like that's that classic line of doing well by doing good. There are actually economic savings by breaking down the silos, de-siloizing the area. I love that. That's a great term. Thank you. And then Vivian, if you wouldn't mind, based on your Singapore experiences, what recommendations would you give to elected and appointed officials to change the governance model and move the agenda of smart cities?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure how much advice we can give. You see, Singapore's unique. We're a city-state. There's a single layer of government. Our Prime Minister is a mathematician, and he still codes. I'm not sure how many other heads of state do that. But let me tell you then what we do in Singapore. These are what we believe to be the roles of government. Number one, infrastructure. So in Singapore right now, every single home and ultimately every office has 2 fibers ending in a home. So that's virtually unlimited bandwidth for the future. This is a key role of government, to roll out infrastructure. Number two, hardware alone isn't enough. You need to train people, you need to educate people, and given the pace of technological advancement, you need to focus not just on training or educating students, but adults as well, who will need to relearn skills for the next phase of their career. In schools, we're going to have computational learning for every single student, so that people know how to code, or at least how to appreciate code. Number three, government has to invest in research and development. So if any of you here have got some crazy, wacky ideas that need funding for research, for development, for prototyping, for test bedding in Singapore, please apply to us. The crazier, the better. But that's because we believe that's where the breakthroughs will occur. The fourth role is for government to be a smart buyer, meaning it's well and fine to develop something in a lab. It's even interesting to prototype it. But if it works, to be able to upscale it into a national solution. And that if the Singapore government buys it from you, that means something. You can now go to other parts of the world and say, well, I have a solution which has solved a problem, and the Singapore government, which you all know is very critical, has decided to pay me real money for it. That's a useful calling card. So that's what I mean by being a smart buyer. The fifth element is to create an ecosystem where it's not just technology or entrepreneurs, but really smart money. And smart money is money that, if you've got a great idea, it's not just money you need, but someone who can mentor you, someone who can give you access to a network, someone who can connect you to bigger markets or to more interesting technology in order to improve your product. The sixth point is really what I refer to as open data, open source, and open standards. And I think this is something that governments need to take a lead on. Now, we all have free Wi-Fi here. For those of you who have your phones, go to this website called beta, B-E-T-A, .data, D-A-T-A, .gov.sg. This is a website in which we are putting all available government data. The website is run on CCAN, so it's open source. The APIs are available, and anyone, any Singaporean, any foreigner, anyone anywhere in the world can take that data, mash it, hopefully co-create solutions which could work to improve services. And equally important, when you move into an open data environment from a government perspective, it means there's going to be a great push on delivery of services efficiently. So I'll give you an example. If you notice a drain is clogged in Singapore, you take a photograph, in 2-3 clicks, it's uploaded. Not only does the agency need to fix it, but that photograph is available for everyone to see, and it is geotagged and it is timed. And therefore, it provides a very strong incentive for the agency to quickly resolve problems. So open data provides avenues in a very real way for citizen participation, for the creation of solutions that cut across boundaries and silos, and is a spur for government to do things quickly and efficiently. And this website, the chief proponent for it, for us, has been no less than our Prime Minister. And he told all the agencies, look, It's not enough to just publish an annual report, or worse, a PDF file. It needs to be machine readable. And what we're trying to do now is to make them all accessible through APIs, application programming interfaces. So as we do this, we believe we can change the culture. We can change the national operating system to one that is based on openness, transparency, service delivery, and co-creation. So even when citizens complain, every complaint is a data point. It's worth something. And even better than complaining, create a solution. And if your solution works, we'll buy it from you. We'll give you a financial incentive to do so. So we believe this is what really being a smart, in our case, we don't just call it a smart city, we're trying to be a smart nation. Of course, we're cheating a bit because we're only a city-state. But the point is, a city-state with a single layer of government and making all data available and bringing all the best minds to bear on a problem, both locally and internationally, is one which I think gives us great potential to crack a few interesting urban solutions for the future. So that's the way we do it.
Well, thank you, Vivian. We will be taking questions, so if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question, we have 2 microphones. We ask you to come to the microphones. I will just briefly summarize what I just heard. And while Singapore may be a unique situation, the 6 key points that Vivian just identified can be replicable in any community, any city, any nation. Again, infrastructure, hardware alone is not enough. Government investing in R&D, government being a smart buyer, creating an equal system of smart money, and then the open data source and standards. Critically important. Matthew talked about, again, the critical issues of, with data and some examples of hybrid buses, zero-emission taxis, and others. London is providing specific examples of the future. Amr reminded us we can't disconnect transportation and energy from other aspects. Our systems need to be integrated. We need our managers and our politicians and leaders to understand the interconnected relationships. And Aisha started us off on ICT, indicating that leadership is key. And again, that change management may take time, 1.5 years. In the scheme of things, is not really that long, especially when infrastructure may last 50, 100, 200, 1,000 years as we go forward. So I welcome from the audience any questions that anyone may have. Again, please come to the microphone. Yes, sir, please. And if you wouldn't mind identifying yourself, please. Thank you.
I'm Pratap Padode from Smart Cities Council, India. And this question was for Vivian. How would you justify the cost, the return on investment for something like open data? Because there is lots of countries, including India, the questions in cities is also, how do you utilize your resources? And therefore, if you're going to invest in open data, big data, for cities, for co-creation, like you said, what's the kind of return on investment you think over what period of time?
Well, first of all, India is going to have is planning to have 100 smart cities. So that's on a scale that's unimaginable anywhere else. My second point would be open data and open source and open standards is more a cultural change rather than an investment. Yes, of course, it does take effort to impose open standards on everyone, but website space, bandwidth, all those costs are falling. So my argument, in fact, it's not my argument, it's what the Prime Minister has imposed on us, is that the costs are trivial, but this is an essential imperative. And in any case, in the case of Singapore, we don't have any secrets to hide. Every tender for every project is published. Put it all out there. So it is more a cultural change rather than an investment decision. But we believe that in any case, the upsides from moving towards such a society far outweigh the administrative burden it confers on civil servants. So yes, from a government point of view, it's a burden on civil servants. But I think if you put it to a vote, the vast majority of your population will say, yes, I do want that data. I want it to be available. I want to be able to mash it. I want to be able to take things from different departments. I want to be able to offer solutions. I want to be able to sell those solutions. So, at that level, the return on investment far justifies it.
And Amma would like to jump in on this.
Just want to add something. Big part of what cities would be creating in this journey is a new economy.
Yes.
From the young upcoming talent, from the young graduates that will be thinking about new ideas and models that the older brain like ourselves won't be able to imagine them because we grew in a completely different environment. I want to give one data point that is very important. We looked at our investment portfolio, and the cost of taking an idea from ideation to commercialization, that used to be 5 years ago, used to cost $5 million at least per idea. So when we invested, we needed to understand that was the cost that we were putting ourselves forward to. Today, it's $5,000 from ideation to commercialization. Why? Because you put on the cloud, you pay as you go, you pay as you grow, you rent, you lease.
Yes.
All of this, all of the tools that you would have needed to buy as CapEx, you no longer need to buy them. You use them and you pay for what you use and you send them back. The talent is available. So the ROI on the open data is not only from the immediate return to the agency or the department, but in how you create a new economy, a new industry in the city for all the young, upcoming, talented individuals to create jobs for the next 300 years in the future.
Absolutely
Yes,
right.
If
Aisha.
I may add also here, for any city managers, they need to present to the leaders such kind of studies, especially when it comes to a platform, opening data and collaboration with the different parties in the cities. And that's what we are doing today in Dubai, whether it be smart districts or even in the central heart of the city. We are building a platform, and it will cost us a big figure. So what is the ROI behind such investment? We are opening our data and sharing our data, whether it be between government to government or government to public and private sector. So what is the ROI?
Amir's point is worth emphasizing. The cost of doing this is falling exponentially.
The barrier to entry from $5 million to
Yes.
$5,000
Yes.
is so much lower. For the same amount of money, you do 1,000 more ideas, you bring them to life. 1,000 more today. And this is only in the span of 5 years.
But you need to be also smart in putting the infrastructure in place.
Absolutely, to
That
allow
will,
for it.
Yes.
Exactly.
Make this figure go down to 5,000.
Right. And Matthew, did you want to add to
Well,
that?
I just really wanted to give the example I gave earlier in that our transit authority invested just £1 million in making the data, the transit data, effectively open source. And it brought forward hundreds of apps. So hundreds of these sort of startups that Amir referred to. So that's creating a new value out of this data. So 1 million of our capital cost created, I think millions of pounds of value to companies. But also, I think it probably changed some transport users' behaviour in that, we have this growing population. We have if you go to London, our tubes can be very squashed. The buses can be very squashed, congested. And I think you will see people changing their behaviour a bit by using their apps. So you have a direct saving then back to the Transit Authority about what services to run, etc., how to manage some of these flows of people. So you're seeing sort of multiple benefits from what is in the big scheme of things, a tiny investment from the City Authority.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes left, so I'd like to take a couple of questions at once, and then we'll decide how to divvy them up. So quickly, if you could tell us your name and your question, and then the next person, and we'll capture all the questions.
Hello. My name is Pablo Valerio for Cities of the Future. My question is for Mr. Salem. It's about this issue of silos that you've been talking before. And it's regarding here in Barcelona, Cisco has been doing a great job in the past with the city council, and I hope it continues to do, And the previous city administration was very, very involved into this smart city movement, but things have changed. There is a new city government right now that it looks like it's not so focused on doing the same kind of things. What happens with these kind of political changes are actually going on, and how is now the program with Cisco and other technology companies working here in Barcelona?
Thank you, Pablo. Next question, please.
Hi, my name is Brana, and I'm from Microsoft in Norway. I have a question to Vivian. I really admire your Prime Minister as actually having the foreseen vision that releasing public data, we are not able to solve the challenges of the innovation on ourselves, but invite not only national, but also in an international community in order to make the innovation and empower that. What kind of business models do you see if you guys select one of the innovations and it works out? In order to build that ecosystem, it needs to have a sustainable business model. Yes. Could you please share some of your thoughts on that business model? Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Question for the panel. So we see technology advancing at breakneck speed, but sometimes regulation and service contracts are not keeping up with the speed of the advancement. So what can be done to bridge this gap? I'm David from Infocom Investments.
Thank you very much. So we have three key questions. The first dealing with what happens with political change in particular, and what corporations and businesses do in that situation. Second, the issue of business models, inviting the international community engaged. And the third, the issue of regulation. And I'd like to ask our panel if they wouldn't mind jumping in on any or all of those questions.
Well, if anybody wants to take the political change, I'm happy to.
Political change, as a politician, the answer is very simple. Vote for the right people.
I think this is fact of life in every environment that we operate in. Agendas change, beliefs change, but at the end of the day, I think I said it earlier, the smart agenda is for the people. You know, it's what services you deliver to the people, make it happier for the people, and this is what will drive the political agenda most of the time.
Maybe let me deal with the question on business model. If I could back up a little bit, what we believe is to first lower the entry barriers. So whether you're a one-man startup, or a fledgling, or Microsoft, or Cisco for that matter, the cost of doing business in Singapore has to be as low as possible. You can register a company in Singapore in 15 minutes because you can do that online. So that's one element. The next element is, as I said earlier, to make sure that funding is available, but not dumb money, but smart money. Money that comes with context, technology, and networks. The third point is to be agnostic. That means whether you're a Singaporean startup or a Singaporean large enterprise or an international company like Microsoft, it doesn't matter. We will treat you all equally. It's fit for purpose. Does the service that you offer, does the software that you offer make sense? Does it meet our needs? And does it pass muster by us? We also realize that because Singapore is so small, there is no real confined local market. So anything which you do in Singapore has to be internationalized, almost at the point of conception. And there's no protective barriers that we can give you. So Singapore also offers itself as a launchpad, as a node in a global network of enterprises, so that good companies, good ideas, good startups can use us as a base, as I said, for R&D, for test bedding, for upscaling, and then sell to Singapore and sell to the rest of the world. So I don't have a single business model in mind, but rather to say that because of our unique circumstances, We need to be as facilitative and as open as possible. On the political point, to put things in context, beyond just voting for the right people, if you have changed the culture in your society to one that demands transparency, competence, honesty, service delivery, it constrains your future politicians. So even if you have a change, they can't change too far from those pathways, because that's what people want. They want government which is open, honest, competent, responsive. And ultimately, it is about good governance. And good governance is based on values, the values of a society, and it almost doesn't matter exactly what form of government you have. It has to meet the requirements of the society, the demands of citizens for good governance. And good governance ultimately produces good jobs. It deals with inequality, and it maintains social cohesion.
Thank you. And if I could ask Aisha and Matthew to address, in particular, the regulation questions. I think that one was key.
In any smart city agenda, the regulation track is one of the main tracks. Not only a regulation related to the ICT infrastructure, but the impact of the ICT infrastructure in any other dimension of the city. For instance, how the ICT infrastructure will affect the road and transport policies and regulation. How is the ICT infrastructure will affect the medical systems, the telepresence, for instance. So all these things, a smart city team or council should look into it and make a proper insight for the best practices happening globally, whether it be from a public sector or even a private sector, and try to draw a new policies that can support this dimension in each, in any city. For instance, in Dubai, yes, we are focusing in opening and sharing the data, and we are focusing also, we have a main track to develop a platform for the city. But one of the main tracks also to develop policies and standards around smart cities. We started with the data law, and very soon will be a bundle of ICT regulation, and followed will be a lot of policies and regulation around entrepreneurs, SMEs, and health and education sector.
Thank you. And Matthew?
Yes, on the regulation, I think there's a few points, and I may be asking more questions rather than answers, but the first thing is we as city authorities, but also our national governments. Now, obviously, Vivian's lucky in that he's both at the same time, yes. But you know, London certainly is around privacy of this data. There's an understandable, perhaps among a lot of people, suspicion of government. There's a newspaper in the UK called the Daily Mail. I always call the Daily Mail test about you know, understandable concern about the government snooping on people. So we talk about having smart Internet of Things, smart fridges, smart freezers. You can imagine the headlines. I can see them already. You know, the government snooping on your fridge, the government snooping on your freezer. So there are issues around regulation. We've heard also some pretty bad data leakages, some of which is very, very personal medical data or people's bank details that have been hacked or somehow been leaked in the system. So it's quite important that we as authorities get regulation around all this data we're going to use it so the citizen feels that it's not going to be misused or leaked. I think there's also a difficulty of us as analog regulators when it comes to some of the new startups. They're very exciting, but you know, we've all seen the arguments over Uber all around the world, and London is certainly not unique to that, in that we found it difficult to accommodate a very compelling product that is extremely disruptive with the current business models, and in some ways are perhaps not bringing the efficiencies I talked about earlier. I mean, in fact, Uber has driven more private hire vehicles onto the streets, it's quadrupled them. That's not efficiency, that's something else that's going on there. So it's complicated, but we're slow at reacting to that, and we're going to have to get better as more disruptive companies come along, which are very attractive to consumers, and you don't want to stop them, but you need to make them work in the best ways possible. And the last one also is to do with standards, I suppose. we've talked about it several times, and I grew up with VHS and Betamax were squabbling. I mean, we all knew who won that battle, but we really do need to have some kind of common standards, and we already have several competing standards organizations almost. So I think we need to sort that out so that all their open data platforms across all the world are broadly common, so that all those clever young people can come up with the apps and the disruptive ideas to make our cities run more efficiently and really deliver that value out of the systems.
And I think government should work like a facilitator for all the city assets, from infrastructure to applications to data.
Right.
And we can't push more because the new generation demand is very high.
Yes.
Indeed. We only have 1 more minute, and for that last minute, I've asked our panelists to give a very brief answer to what advice would you give to mayors and elected officials in particular to enable a smart city? And I'd like to ask Amr to start.
What we've heard here is the breaking of silos. We've heard of the open data. We've heard of the investment. My advice is think of the technology as the enabler to the journey, not the journey. Technology will only digitize the physical world and connect it to the digital world to make things possible.
Thank you. Matthew.
I think if you're running a city authority, it's really getting your data out in the most open way possible, and as much of it as you can reasonably do as well. The market will come up with ideas to solve your problems, but a relatively small amount of investment can create huge value from that new market and help to solve the problems that all our cities are facing. And that would be my elevator pitch sale to a mayor of anywhere.
Thank you. Aisha.
From my experience in Dubai, I think every city should focus both vertical and horizontal. Keep the entities or the authorities work in whatever business they are and improve all their services through ICT systems, but also work into the horizontal cut through these organizations to break all the silos, whether opening the data or developing APIs on top of that data. So both of them, they are very important. You cannot stop one of them, but they have to work hand by hand.
Hand in hand. Thank you. And Vivian.
Well, I've probably said too much already, but I would say keep an open mind. Understand that value now comes at the boundaries of different disciplines and different silos. Trust your people and give opportunities to people both within and outside your city to solve real-world problems. And it's a great time to be alive because we're living through a revolution. And everyone can participate and hopefully make a better world.
I appreciate Vivian's optimism on that. I share our panel's optimism as we go forward. Audience, please let's give our panel a warm thank you for this.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. Thank you, Vivian.
We should get a picture together?
Yes, I think.
Casi 54.000 adosadas, es decir, que haciendo la traducción